Tonight I'm going to try to cover things just a little faster than the last time. Not that there was anything wrong last time, but just that I went slow because I wanted everybody to comprehend everything, but I didn't want it to come out slow. And I certainly didn't want it to be like 20 minutes long, but I'm going to shoot for 10 on this one. What we're going to cover tonight, and this is important, this ties in. This is physiology and physics tying in. But this has to do with thinking. There are a couple of cues in psychology that they teach you about. One is an inside cue or a stressor. Okay, it could be a stressor. Another one is an outside cue. Something that happens, your brain is a clean slate, and then something happens, and now the way you think is different based on that outside cue. Now, in terms of behavior, where this correlates is that sometimes people can become bogged down with inside cues. Like, you might not realize it, but like, let's say the boss, he gives someone else the raise and you really deserve the raise, and you know in your mind you deserve the raise. That's going to add an element of tension, but that's an inside cue. That's an outside cue that becomes an inside cue, and before you know it, you're stressed. Another inside cue could be you wake up in the morning and you just have a horrible thought. That could be another version of an inside cue. An outside cue would be just straight something else happens, and now your brain is going to decide what it thinks about it. So an outside cue can affect you in a big way because sometimes it just comes out of the blue and something happens and boom, now your brain just has to react to it. If you come be bogged down with inside cues, okay, and now an outside cue happens, a big one, like you buy a new car and you take a friend you really want to impress for a ride and it breaks down. That could be a major stress because you were trying to show off, you were trying to show them your new car, and this dang thing just broke on you. But there's all different levels to inside cue, outside cue, how serious they can be, and how much they're going to affect you. But depending on where your stress level is, because not everyone operates at the same stress level, if you're bogged down with inside cues, like I don't like me, I have an inner critic going on, I don't know how to feel about my life, these kinds of things, when a big outside cue happens, like a sudden loss, let's say, someone that you love tremendously just passes suddenly. Or, like I said, you really love your job. You give 160% there, and they just fire you. And there's no explanation, and they're just right because what are you going to do, right? I mean, you can't go to the desk and start acting like a madman. Security will have you out of there. So, where this correlates to the inner critic is that inside and outside cues can sometimes beef up or intensify what's called an inner critic. So like something traumatic happens, you think of something traumatic, could be a memory or a new causation, something new happens, and now all of a sudden the stuff you usually like you like your job, you like your spouse, you like your kids, you like your playtime, you like your hobbies, this stuff starts to go out the window and we don't feel the same about it anymore. And that can be a real drag on the mentality because you're not getting that boost that you usually get out of everything. Well, where this ties into behavior is that most people think, they have a good sense of where they're at in life and they pretty much know themselves and know their own behaviors. But if you're in any kind of recovery from anything, be it like, alcohol, substances, codependent relationships, narcissistic abuse, any sort of trauma that either you brought about on yourself or trauma that the world brought about, sometimes this can become quite difficult managing the inner critic. The inner critic is you're showing up everywhere on the map. You're paying for stuff, you're being nice to people, you're listening to people, you're empathizing, you're just there, and you know it. Like, you don't doubt that, in your mind. You're showing up for everyone. But this inner critic is going to tell you different. This inner critic is going to tell you that you're a bum, you're a lack, you do a half-assed job and you don't try and you never succeed and you never finish anything, and on and on and on and on and on. This is where mental health and things like attitude and cognitive skills come together and are humongous. Because if you do the education work, like if you just so happen to tune into stuff and you listen to coaches that know about what they're talking about, they're going to advise you on this exact sort of thing. I.e., I had a traumatic event happen to me, and then you're going to go, bong, wow, that happened to me too. Oh my God, tell me about it. And then they're going to tell you about it, and then you're going to say, it was exactly like that for me. Okay, and this is how we grow. Okay, this is how everybody respects everybody, and everybody shows everybody that, like, mistakes and all, we're all just trying to, like, go forward and learn and just do better, or at least you should be. So where this ties into physics is that we're talking about the brain, we're talking about neurons, we're talking about memories. Okay, this is getting into the subatomic realm of photons and virtual photons in the brain. Where do memories come from? Where do thoughts come from? Some in physics now are arguing that they do indeed could possibly come from the past, or what we call negative time. Because light, Einstein knew that at the speed of light, you don't experience time, right? And of course, light being a boson, its wavelength just gets stretched out and it gets redshifted over time. But when we're talking about the brain, a thought, a memory, something that you pop up instinctually, there's a causation to that. Now, some would argue that time is nothing more than a series of causations, and then therefore it's really not anything you can count, because causations are different depending on all sorts of factors. So this is why time is relative and it's different everywhere, because according to temperature, pressure, things like that, the way atoms and energy are going to move and mix is going to be different. So time's going to be a little bit different. Easiest way to describe that, let's say we have a steak and we don't want it to go bad, so we put it in the fridge, we cool it, and what happens? It stays longer, right? Okay, that's the easiest way to describe that. Where these really tie together when it comes to behavior and thoughts, which we know come from all the way down to the subatomic realm, right? Now we know that. And then behavior, which is behavior is going into the future. Because now you're acting on something, and now there's a whole bunch of stuff's going to take place. There's a causation, there's going to be a reaction, and now, depending on what you did, there's going to be a consequence. So my warning, I guess it is, to anyone who's interested in this, is that even when you think you know yourself, like, really, really well, and you think you have, like, dang it, I know me, like, there's no chance, like, I would ever act up, or, like, I just would never pick up that drink, or I just would never act crazy. Trust me, if you haven't had a major outside cue come in, like I said, like someone passing away that you care about perhaps, or, you get paralyzed, or some major something that it's going to inhibit your function, and I mean mentally and physically, okay? You need to be careful, okay? And especially when it comes to managing your inside and your outside cues. Easiest way to do that, attitude. If you know you don't like something, you feel a certain way about something and you don't like it, just agree to agree. I don't like that, and move on. Push the file to the back of the mind, move on, and move on to the next thing. Don't keep bringing it up. Don't have little court cases in your head where you're telling off that person that you've always wanted to tell off, okay? Because you're engaging your inner critic when you do that. Whether you realize it or not, you're actually adding more stress, more entropy to your system, more negative energy to your system by doing that. And that's going to affect your behavior. one of the interesting things about physics is that the more I learn about it, the easier it is to understand it. And it's like, at first, you learn about stars, and then you learn about like what happens when they collapse. And then if you happen to have any experience in science at all, maybe you dealt with temperature and pressure somewhere, or you dealt with electricity, these things are going to tie in, and you're going to start to get a bigger picture of what's going on. But today, I put up an article, I wrote up an article on black holes, and I was talking about how, like, black holes really sort of are a brain in a way, because according to what gravity does there, it crushes mass and energy so much to the point where what we think of as wavelengths are completely flattened out. So that it's really zero time inside these things. And the temperature is absolute zero, meaning no thermal energy, but that intrinsic energy, that 0 point energy that exists in just the actual quark, the gluon, the lifeblood of the atom, is still left over. And at that point, this gravity is going to crush that to the point where really all you're going to see is photons. You know what I mean? As you're coming around the edge of this thing. But inside is not too far different than the human brain. They actually sort of correlate, because your human brain can be blank. I'm not thinking of a single thing. And now I can pop a memory into existence, and boom, all of a sudden my energy in my body feels different. Well, holes are like this in a way, because the more mass they eat, this is really weird, the more mass they eat, just like a battery, if you charge it, it'll get heavy. Okay, well, these things can eat light and get heavier, which is so weird how, because usually you think of energize something, it moves around fast, and now it's lighter, and you get more motion. Not with these. These are so dense and so massive that when they eat energy, okay, they actually just get heavier. And the volume goes up a little bit, and they get a little less dense, which is weird. Usually you think, pack more stuff, it's going to get more dense. Not with these. As the volume goes up, the density comes down. Ultimately, you are your own critic. You're in charge of your own behavior. You will be responsible for that behavior and no one else. And I want you to keep these reminders, whoever's watching this, regardless of who you are. You might need to hear this message right now, because you might be really, really upset about something, and you might be thinking about doing something stupider than hell, which could include telling someone off or whatever. But I really want you to think about the stress of that inside cue, the stress of that outside cue, managing your inner critic, and monitoring your behavior. What do I mean by that to end off the video? Case in point, how have you been acting for a consistent period of time? Do you know yourself? Do you know how you act? Do people tell you how you act? Do they tell you what they think of you? Do they tell you how you make them feel? Well, take that into consideration. Don't write that off. Don't make that something that's cheap that you don't need to pay attention